At that time, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle was called and ordered to start training capable pilots in V-25s on short field landings and takeoffs. April the 2nd, following their training, they were moved aboard the Hornet and then were told their mission was to bomb Tokyo. On April the 18th, en route to Tokyo, 600 miles distant from Tokyo, 200 miles short of their planned launch area, they were spotted by a Japanese fishing vessel. Admiral Halsey, in command of the Hornet, suspected that they would report the position. He turned the ship into the wind and at flank speed launched 16 V-25s. All planes reached their target. Everyone dropped their bombs, but due to the early launch, several of them crashed trying to reach their destinations in China. Of the 80 crewmen, 74 survived. 1 died during bailout, 2 died in the crash, 8 were captured, and 3 were executed. Following this, Admiral Nimitz knew there was going to be retaliation following the Tokyo raid. Our intelligence began receiving messages using the letters AF and AO. We had broken the Japanese code to a point, but they could not determine what these letters meant. Our chief intelligence officer told Nimitz, he says, I've devised a plan to ascertain what they mean. He says, we'll send out an uncoded message saying that Midway has just had a freshwater condenser failure. The Japs took the bait. They sent out a coded message saying AF has just had a freshwater condenser failure. We then knew what AF meant, but we still did not know if their plans were to strike the Aleutian Islands or Midway. Nimitz believed it was going to be Midway, but in disguise, he sent a small task force to the Aleutian Islands. Yamamoto says, well, the American forces are moving towards the Aleutians. We will now take Midway. Nimitz then dispatched their main task force to Midway, positioning our carriers in one location and the rest of the fleet in another. And at the same time, my squadron, VP-23, and 2 other PBY squadrons on June the 1st, 1942, went to Midway. We began our search for the Japanese fleet, and on the 3rd day, we found them. 700 miles distant from Midway, moving towards Midway under a weather front. 4 carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, freighters, and troop ships. Yes, they came in anticipation of taking Midway. On June the 4th, Japanese forces struck Midway. They hit Midway with fighters and dive bombers, and fortunately for us, they did not do a lot of damage because a lot of the stuff on Midway at that time was underground in sand bunkers. In defense of Midway, the Marines had 27 Brewster Buffalo fighters, which by no means was no match for a Zero fighter. 27 aircraft tried to defend Midway, only three survived. At the same time, our torpedo bombers were being annihilated, trying to strike the Japanese forces. Our torpedo bombers were too slow for the Zeros. 52 torpedo bombers attacked the fleet. 7 survived. But this was the moment when the tide was about to turn. We were definitely losing the battle. But a gentleman by the name of Wade McCluskey, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, was the leader of 3 squadrons of SBD dive bombers. They'd been searching for 2 hours for the Japanese fleet to no avail. Nearing near the end of their intended checkpoint, they were running low on fuel, but McCluskey decided to press on. And just moments later, he spotted the white wake of a fast-moving Japanese destroyer. He said, well, that destroyer has to be racing to rejoin the main fleet. We'll follow it. And again, just moments later, they found 3 aircraft carriers. And from 20,000 feet, they struck 3 carriers and in 5 minutes inflicted sufficient damage to sink them all. The carriers didn't sink immediately. They were aided, our fleet were aided by 2 things. So the Japanese fighters were at low altitudes protecting their own ships against our torpedo planes. And there was an argument between Yamamoto and Nagumo on how to rearm. Nagumo had received word that Midway was not severely damaged. His plans were to rearm with bombs and go back to Midway. Yamamoto said, no, we'll arm with torpedoes and go after the fleet. In the midst of their confusion, it's when our plane struck. Fuel trucks, bombs, and torpedoes on deck. It was a flaming inferno when they hit. A little later, Admiral Spruance called Nimitz and he says, Admiral, he said, we've sunk 3 carriers. Do you think that's enough? He said, hell no, I want that 4th carrier. Later that day, they found it, and it was also sunk. I flew 13 hours that day, armed with 4 500-pound bombs, and we were very fortunate. Late in the afternoon, we caught a sub that was attempting to submerge. Decks were beginning to become awash. There was no one on deck. The hatches were closed. Our first bomb we hit near the stern of the ship, and the second 500-pounder hit right behind the conning tower. We circled several times and seen all kind of debris coming to the surface. We did receive credit for 1 submarine kill. Before sunset, my pilot, Lieutenant J.G. Murphy, says, Jack, I want you to pool the crew and see what they want to do. We've lost all contact with Midway. We don't know if we can go hold the island or if the Japs have it. We can either to return to Midway or we can sit down at sea. Of course, the decision was unanimous. We sat down at sea. I took a sleeping bag, climbed on top of the wing. You can't see it here, but on the top of this wing, there's a rotating antenna that the radio underneath here manually turns. I took a rope, lashed myself to the antenna, crawled in the sleeping bag. At sunrise, we finally made contact with Midway and learned that there was a destroyer at the French frigate Shoals loaded with aviation fuel. We took navigational sun shots, flew to the Shoals, refueled, and returned to Pearl Harbor. On July the 1st, we were on our way again. Yeah, take that one down. July the 1st, I was on my way to Guadalcanal. This is an island 25 miles in diameter 3,500 miles from Pearl Harbor. This was our plans were there to patrol all of these islands, Ellis, Marshall, and Gilbert. We patrolled all of the Solomon Islands. For the first 3 months, I was based at Noumea, New Caledonia. At that time, Admiral Gormley was the commanding officer of Guadalcanal, and we were certainly losing that battle. On October the 1st, and he was trying to control this island and had never been on the island physically. He'd never been on it at all. At any rate, Admiral Halsey was sent by Nimitz to relieve Admiral Gormley, and things began to change. When Halsey arrived, his immediate action was he visited Guadalcanal. He visited every unit there and told them, he says, I want you to load your guns. He says, we're going to kill every son of a bitch on the island. And he says, I'll be right there with you. At the same time, my squadron, VP-23, was moved from Noumea to wrong one. Anyway, I was moved from New Caledonia to Espiritu Santo. The red lines here shows where two PBYs flew this corridor, 4 PBYs out of here, and 6 out of here. That was our squadron, the squadron of 12 PBYs, VP-23. I'd like to read you a small excerpt here that came, hold that book up. No, the book. Oh, the book. Admiral McCain was sent there to command all the air forces in that area. Excuse me if I find it here. This page come out of this book, and Admiral McCain was sent there, and he said, flag and seaplane tender Curtis. This was the Curtis right here that we tended off of. It was also dispatched from Noumea, New Caledonia to Espiritu Santo as when we moved. At any rate, it says, Rear Admiral McCain, boss of all the aircraft in the theater, flew his flag and seaplane tender Curtis at Espiritu Santo, which from August 5 played host to Patrol Squadron VP-23. While the modern small seaplane tender Mackinac set up a refuge on August 8 for 9 PBYs of VP-23 at Maliata. Right here. I flew patrol out of there, Santa Cruz, and Maliata. Spent 6 months in Guadalcanal. Returned several times with perforations in the aircraft.
Take a step.
But we never had a crewman injured, never lost an engine. On January the 1st, 1943, I, along with several others, received orders to proceed back to Pearl Harbor. Our orders were at that time to travel on to San Diego and help commission a new PBY squadron and return to the South Pacific. When we reached San Diego, our orders had been changed. We immediately began training in B-24s.